The silver chalice slipped from Sloane's trembling fingers, crashing against the marble floor with a sound that echoed through the grand hall like thunder. Every wolf in the room froze, their conversations dying mid-sentence as hundreds of eyes turned toward the powerless girl who had just shattered the Alpha King's ceremonial cup. Blood rushed to Sloane's cheeks as she dropped to her knees, frantically gathering the scattered pieces. The sharp edges cut into her palms, but she barely felt the sting. What terrified her more was the heavy silence pressing down on her shoulders and the familiar scent of pine and storm clouds growing stronger with each passing second. He was coming. "Leave it," a deep voice commanded from behind her. Sloane's heart hammered against her ribs as Alpha King Elias stepped into view, his polished black boots stopping just inches from her bloodied hands. She couldn't bring herself to look up, couldn't bear to see the disgust that would surely be written across his face. Everyone knew she was the pack's greatest shame. 22 years old and still wolfless, still powerless, still nothing. "I said leave it." His voice was softer now, almost gentle, and that scared her more than his anger ever could. A warm hand touched her chin, tilting her face upward until she had no choice but to meet his eyes. They were the color of amber honey, flecked with gold that seemed to glow in the candlelight. But it was the expression in those eyes that made her breath catch in her throat, not disgust or disappointment, but something that looked almost like wonder. "Your scent," he whispered, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "It's impossible. Before I go further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're hooked already, a like and subscribe will keep these stories coming." The great hall buzzed with whispers as Alpha King Elias helped Sloane to her feet, his large hands surprisingly gentle as they steadied her shaking form. She tried to pull away, tried to disappear back into the shadows where she belonged, but his grip tightened just enough to keep her close. "What's your name?" he asked, though his question carried the weight of a command. "Sloane," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sloane Blackwood." Something flickered in his eyes at the mention of her surname, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. His nostrils flared slightly as he drew in another breath, and she watched his pupils dilate with an intensity that made her knees weak. "Blackwood," he repeated slowly, as if testing the name on his tongue. "And you're wolfless." It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway, shame burning through her chest like acid. Everyone in the Northern Territories knew her story. The girl born to a respected Beta family who had failed to shift on her 18th birthday, then her 19th, then her 20th. Each year that passed without her wolf's arrival had driven her further from pack society, until she became little more than a servant in her own home. "Fascinating," Elias murmured, his hand moving to cup the back of her neck. The touch sent electric shocks down her spine, and she gasped at the unexpected sensation. "Tell me, little wolf, do you feel it too?" "Feel what?" she breathed, though part of her already knew the answer. The pull she'd been fighting all evening, the way her skin seemed to come alive whenever he was near, the strange warmth spreading through her chest like honey. "The bond," he said simply, and the words hit her like a physical blow. Impossible. She was nobody, nothing. Alpha Kings didn't mate with wolfless outcasts. They chose strong she-wolves from powerful families, women who could stand beside them as equals and bear strong heirs. Not broken girls who served wine at pack gatherings and slept in servants' quarters. But even as her mind rejected the possibility, her body betrayed her. Her pulse quickened under his touch, and she found herself leaning into his warmth despite every logical thought screaming at her to run. "You're mistaken," she whispered, finally finding her voice. "I can't be your mate. I'm nothing." His eyes flashed with something dangerous, and his grip on her neck tightened just enough to make her breath hitch. "Don't," he growled, his voice dropping to a rumble that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "Don't ever call yourself nothing again." The command in his voice made her wolfless soul submit instinctively, and she found herself nodding before she could stop herself. Around them, The pack members watched with a mixture of fascination and horror. Some looked scandalized by the very idea of their Alpha King claiming a wolfless mate, while others seemed to be enjoying the drama unfolding before them. "Elias," a smooth voice interrupted, and Sloane turned to see Luna Catherine approaching with measured steps. The Alpha King's current mate was everything Sloane was not: tall, elegant, powerful, with silver hair that caught the light like spun moonbeams. Her wolf was one of the strongest in the pack, and her political connections had helped secure several important alliances for the Northern Territories. She was also, Sloane realized with growing dread, absolutely furious. "What is the meaning of this?" Catherine asked, her voice carefully controlled but her green eyes blazing with barely contained rage. "Surely you're not suggesting that this girl is your fated mate?" The word girl dripped with such contempt that Sloane flinched, but Elias's hand on her neck kept her from retreating entirely. She could feel the tension radiating from his body, could sense the careful balance of power that was about to shift dramatically. "I'm not suggesting anything," Elias replied evenly. "I'm stating a fact. This woman carries my mate's scent." A collective gasp rose from the crowd, and Sloane felt the world tilt beneath her feet. This couldn't be happening. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her. "That's impossible," Catherine said, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice now. "She's wolfless. The moon goddess doesn't grant fated mates to those who can't shift." "The moon goddess works in mysterious ways," Elias replied, his amber eyes never leaving Sloane's face. "Who are we to question her wisdom?" Luna Catherine's composure cracked slightly, and Sloane caught a glimpse of the desperate woman beneath the polished exterior. She had built her entire identity around being the Alpha King's mate, and now that foundation was crumbling beneath her feet. "This is ridiculous," Catherine snapped, taking a step closer. "You would throw away everything we've built together for some wolfless servant. Think about what this means for the pack, for our alliances. My family will withdraw their support if you—" "Enough." Elias's voice cut through her protests like a blade, and even Catherine fell silent at the alpha command that rippled through the air. "You forget your place, Catherine. You were chosen for political convenience, not by the bonds of fate. That arrangement served its purpose, but it ends now." The cruelty in his dismissal made Sloane's chest ache with sympathy for the other woman, even as her own world continued to spin out of control. She watched Catherine's face cycle through shock, hurt, and finally a cold fury that promised retribution. "You'll regret this," Catherine said quietly, her voice like winter wind through bare branches. "Both of you." She turned and swept from the hall, her loyal followers trailing behind her like a silver-tipped storm cloud. The remaining pack members shifted restlessly, uncertain of where their loyalties should lie in this sudden upheaval. Elias seemed unconcerned by the political chaos he'd just unleashed. His attention remained fixed on Sloane, studying her face as if trying to memorize every detail. "Come," he said finally, offering her his arm. "We have much to discuss." Sloane stared at his extended elbow, knowing that taking it would change everything. There would be no going back to her simple life of invisibility and servitude. Whatever came next would be complicated, dangerous, and probably painful. But the alternative was returning to the shadows, and something deep inside her rebelled against that fate. She placed her hand on his arm, feeling the solid warmth of muscle beneath expensive fabric. His smile was small but genuine, and it transformed his entire face from intimidating to almost tender. "Good girl," he murmured, and the praise sent another shiver down her spine. They walked together through the parting crowd, and Sloane tried to ignore the whispers that followed in their wake. Some voices carried curiosity, others skepticism, and more than a few promised trouble ahead. But wrapped in Elias's powerful presence, she felt safer than she had in years. He led her through corridors she'd only glimpsed while carrying trays and cleaning supplies, Past tapestries that told the history of their pack and portraits of long-dead alphas who seemed to watch their progress with ancient eyes. Everything felt surreal, like walking through a dream that might shatter at any moment. They stopped outside a heavy oak door carved with symbols she didn't recognize, and Elias turned to face her fully. "Before we go further," he said, his expression growing serious, "I need you to understand what this means. If you truly are my fated mate, everything changes. For both of us." Sloane nodded, though she wasn't sure she understood anything at all. "The mating bond isn't just about attraction," he continued. "It's about souls recognizing their other half, about two beings becoming something greater together. It's sacred, binding, and irreversible once completed." "Completed?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "The claiming bite," he said softly, his fingers trailing along the curve of her neck. "When an alpha marks his mate, it creates an unbreakable bond. Her wolf awakens fully, their life forces intertwine, and they become one in the eyes of the moon goddess." His touch left trails of fire on her skin, and she found herself arching into the contact despite her nervousness. "What if I don't have a wolf to awaken?" she whispered. Something flickered in his eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps, or worry. "Then we'll find out together," he said finally. He pushed open the door to reveal a chamber that took her breath away. The room was clearly his private study, filled with leather-bound books and comfortable furniture, but what caught her attention was the massive window that looked out over the pack's territory. The full moon hung heavy in the star-scattered sky, casting silver light across the forest that stretched to the horizon. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Yes," Elias agreed, but when she glanced at him, he was looking at her, not the view. Heat crept up her neck at the intensity of his gaze, and she suddenly became hyper-aware of everything about him. The way he moved with predatory grace, the subtle power that hummed beneath his skin, the scent of pine and storms that seemed to wrap around her like an embrace. "Elias," she started, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. "I know this is overwhelming," he said gently, moving to stand behind her. "I know your life has just been turned upside down, and you probably have 1,000 questions." She did have questions. So many that they tangled together in her mind like knotted threads. But standing there in the moonlight, feeling the warmth radiating from his body, only one question seemed to matter. "Are you sure?" she whispered. "Are you absolutely certain that I'm your mate?" His hands settled on her shoulders, solid and reassuring. "The scent doesn't lie, little wolf. You smell like home, like everything I've been searching for without even knowing it." She closed her eyes, letting herself lean back against his chest. For just a moment, she allowed herself to believe that this was real, that fate had finally smiled upon the pack's greatest disappointment. But as his arms wrapped around her waist, something nagged at the back of her mind. A half-remembered dream, a flash of golden eyes that looked just like his, and the echo of a lullaby sung in a voice that sounded achingly familiar. She was about to ask him about it when a knock at the door shattered the peaceful moment. "Enter," Elias called, though his arms tightened around her protectively. An elderly woman stepped into the room. Her silver hair braided with colored ribbons and her eyes the cloudy white of the pack's most powerful seer. Sloane had seen her from a distance during ceremonies, but had never spoken to Elder Moira directly. "Alpha King," the old woman said, her voice carrying an odd tension. "I bring urgent news about the girl." Sloane felt Elias stiffen behind her, his muscles coiling with sudden alertness. "What news?" he asked carefully. Elder Moira's blind eyes seemed to look directly at Sloane, and her wrinkled face creased with what might have been pity. "The moon goddess has shown me a vision," she said slowly, "about this child's true heritage." The bottom dropped out of Sloane's world as the old woman's next words hit like lightning. "She is not your mate, Alpha King. She is your daughter." The silence that followed Elder Moira's words stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. Sloane felt Elias's arms go rigid around her, his breath catching in his throat as the impossible truth settled between them like a poisonous cloud. "No," he whispered, the word barely audible. That's not possible. But even as he spoke, Sloane could feel the change in him. The way his body recoiled from hers, the way his hands dropped away as if her skin had suddenly become toxic. The warmth that had surrounded her moments before evaporated, leaving her cold and exposed in the moonlight. Elder Moira stepped deeper into the room, her cloudy eyes never wavering from Sloane's face. The vision was clear, my lord. 22 years ago, during the attack on the eastern border, a child was taken. A daughter with your eyes and your mate's scent signature. Sloane's legs buckled, and she gripped the windowsill to keep from falling. Her mind raced, trying to process what she was hearing. Daughter. But that would mean the Blackwoods weren't her real family, that everything she'd believed about herself was a lie. The eastern border attack, Elias repeated, his voice hollow. That was when? He stopped abruptly, his face going ashen. When your true mate died, Elder Moira finished gently. Queen Isabel. She died defending the nursery, and in the chaos that followed, her child disappeared. Everyone assumed the baby had perished in the flames. The room spun around Sloane as fragments of memory suddenly clicked into place. Dreams of a woman with golden hair singing lullabies, flashes of a grand nursery filled with toys she could never quite remember owning, and the persistent feeling that she'd never quite belonged with the Blackwood family despite their kindness. The scent, Elias said suddenly, his voice cracking. She carries Isabel's scent because she's Isabel's daughter. Not because she's my mate, but because she's my. He couldn't finish the sentence. Instead, he stumbled backward, putting distance between himself and Sloane as if proximity to her caused him physical pain. Your daughter, Elder Moira confirmed. Hidden away by enemies who sought to use her as leverage, then lost in the confusion when their plans fell apart. The Blackwoods found her days later, alone and traumatized, with no memory of her true identity. They raised her as their own, never knowing they harbored a princess. Sloane's world tilted on its axis. Princess. The word felt foreign in her mind, impossible to connect with her reality of servitude and shame. This is why I never shifted, she whispered, understanding dawning like a terrible sunrise. Lycans don't get their wolves until they're claimed by their true heritage. Precisely, Elder Moira nodded. Your bloodline is royal, child. Your wolf has been sleeping, waiting for recognition, waiting for you to take your rightful place. Elias made a sound like a wounded animal, and when Sloane turned to look at him, she saw horror written across his features. His hands were shaking, his amber eyes wide with a mixture of revulsion and devastation. What have I done? He breathed. The bond one felt, the way I touched you, the things I said. You didn't know, Sloane said quickly, though her own stomach churned with the implications. The attraction she'd felt, the electric response to his touch, the way her body had yearned for his. It had all been real, but it had been wrong in ways that made her soul recoil. It doesn't matter what I knew, Elias snapped, his voice rising with self-directed fury. I am your father and I. He stopped, pressing his palms against his temples as if trying to crush the memories. The moon goddess help me, I nearly. The door burst open without warning, and Luna Catherine swept in with several pack elders behind her. Her green eyes were bright with malicious satisfaction as she took in the scene. Elias's obvious distress, Sloane's pale shock, and Elder Moira's grim presence. Well, well, Catherine purred, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I heard the most interesting rumor. Something about the Alpha King's fated mate being rather more family than expected. Catherine, Elias warned, but his voice lacked its usual authority. He looked shattered, broken by the revelation that had just destroyed both his world and Sloane's. Oh, don't worry, Catherine continued, moving closer with predatory grace. I'm not here to gloat. Well, not entirely. I'm here because this changes everything, doesn't it? The wolfless servant girl isn't your mate. She's your heir. The words hit Sloane like physical blows. Another impossible concept to wrap her mind around. She'd spent her entire life believing she was nothing, and now she was supposed to be everything. This must be quite the shock for you, dear, Catherine said, turning her attention to Sloane with mock concern. One moment you're a powerless nobody, the next you're a Leaken princess. How overwhelming it must be. Leave her alone, Elias growled, stepping protectively between Catherine and Sloane despite his own turmoil. She's been through enough. Oh, I'm just getting started, Catherine replied sweetly. You see, there are some very interesting political implications here. If this girl truly is your daughter, then she has a claim to the throne. My throne. The threat in her voice was unmistakable, and Sloane felt ice form in her veins. She'd found her family only to potentially lose her life. You wouldn't dare, Elias said, but doubt flickered in his eyes. Wouldn't I? Catherine's smile was sharp as broken glass. Accidents happen all the time, especially to newly discovered royalty who haven't learned to protect themselves yet. Elder Moira stepped forward, her blind gaze somehow managing to pin Catherine in place. The moon goddess protects her chosen, Luna Catherine. You would be wise to remember that. The moon goddess helps those who help themselves, Catherine shot back. And I intend to help myself to everything I've worked so hard to build. The tension in the room was suffocating, and Sloane could feel violence crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Everyone was staring at her as if she were a prize to be won or a problem to be solved, and the weight of their expectations was crushing. Stop, she said quietly, but her voice cut through the arguing voices like a blade. Just stop. Something in her tone made everyone freeze, and for a moment, the only sound was the wind outside the window. I don't want your throne, Sloane continued, looking directly at Catherine. I don't want power or politics or any of this. I just want to understand who I am. Noble sentiment, Catherine replied coldly, but irrelevant. You exist, therefore you're a threat. Royal blood doesn't just disappear because you're too naive to use it. She's right, Elder Moira said grimly. Your very existence changes the succession. There will be those who seek to use you, and others who seek to eliminate you. There is no going back to your old life, child. Sloane felt tears threatening, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people who saw her as either a tool or an obstacle. What happens now? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Elias straightened, and she watched him struggle to put aside his personal devastation to think like a king. Now we prove your identity beyond doubt. Blood magic, DNA analysis, whatever it takes. And then we make her disappear, Catherine interrupted smoothly. Permanently. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, and Sloane saw several of the pack elders nod in agreement. Politics trumped newly discovered family bonds, apparently. Over my dead body, Elias snarled, his alpha power suddenly flooding the room with such intensity that several people staggered. That can be arranged, Catherine replied, unfazed by his display of dominance. You're not as untouchable as you think, my dear husband. Kings have fallen before. The threat was clear, and Sloane realized with growing horror that she hadn't just found her family. She'd potentially destroyed it. Her very existence had lit a fuse that could explode the entire pack structure. Before anyone could respond, the lights in the room suddenly flickered and died, plunging them into moonlit darkness. In the shadows, Sloane heard the unmistakable sound of multiple footsteps approaching the door. Catherine's supporters, she realized with a chill. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a coup. Guards! Elias shouted, but his call was answered by the metallic ring of weapons being drawn instead of the sound of loyal soldiers arriving. I'm afraid your guards are otherwise occupied, Catherine said, her voice now openly triumphant. Amazing how quickly loyalties can shift when the right incentives are offered. As Sloane's eyes adjusted to the darkness, she could make out armed figures filling the doorway. Their faces were hidden by masks, but their intent was crystal clear. Elder Moira grabbed Sloane's arm with surprising strength. The window, she whispered urgently. There's a ledge that leads to the old tower. Oh, now. I won't leave him, Sloane protested, looking at Elias who was positioning himself to fight despite being outnumbered. You must, Elias said without turning around. If you die tonight, Isabel's sacrifice means nothing. Her bloodline dies with you. The first attacker lunged forward, and steel clashed against steel as Elias met the assault with deadly precision. But there were too many of them, and Sloane knew he wouldn't be able to hold them off for long. She looked at the window, then back at the father she'd just discovered and might lose forever. The choice should have been impossible, but Elder Moira made it for her by literally pushing her toward the glass. "Live, princess," the old woman commanded. "Live and reclaim what was stolen from you." As Sloane fumbled with the window latch, she heard Catherine's laughter rise above the sounds of combat, cold and victorious. "Don't worry, little princess," Catherine called out mockingly. "I'll take very good care of your father once you're gone." The window opened with a rush of cold air, and Sloane found herself staring down at a drop that would either save her life or end it. Behind her, she heard Elias cry out in pain, and something inside her chest cracked open like an egg. Sloane's bare feet hit the stone ledge with jarring force, her knees buckling as she fought to keep her balance 3 stories above the ground. The ancient stonework was slick with evening dew, and for a terrifying moment she felt herself sliding toward the edge before her fingers found purchase in the gaps between stones. The sounds of battle echoed from the window behind her. Steel against steel, shouts of pain, and Catherine's triumphant laughter cutting through it all like a blade. Every instinct screamed at her to go back, to help the father she'd just discovered, but Elder Moira's words rang in her ears. "Live, princess. Live." She forced herself to move, inching along the narrow ledge toward the old tower Elder Moira had mentioned. Each step was agony, her heart hammering against her ribs as she pressed herself against the cold stone wall. Below, she could see guards with torches beginning to spread out across the courtyard, searching for her. The ledge ended at a crumbling window frame, its glass long since shattered by time and weather. Sloane squeezed through the opening and tumbled onto the dusty floor of what had once been a grand library. Moonlight streamed through holes in the roof, illuminating rows of rotting books and furniture draped in cobwebs. She pressed her back against the wall, trying to catch her breath and think. Catherine had orchestrated this perfectly, using the revelation about Sloane's identity as the perfect distraction to launch a coup. While everyone was reeling from the truth about the lost princess, Catherine had positioned her supporters and struck when Elias was most vulnerable. A sound from below made her freeze. Footsteps on ancient stairs, moving with purposeful stealth. They'd found her hiding place already. Panic clawed at her throat as she looked around desperately for another exit. The main door was blocked by whoever was climbing toward her, and the windows were too high to jump from safely. She was trapped. The footsteps grew closer, and Sloane grabbed a piece of broken pottery from the floor, holding it like a pathetic weapon. It wouldn't do much good against trained fighters, but it was better than nothing. "Princess!" The voice that called to her was familiar, and Sloane nearly sobbed with relief when Beta Marcus appeared in the doorway. He was one of Elias's most trusted advisors, a man she'd served wine to countless times during pack meetings. "Beta Marcus," she gasped. "Thank the moon goddess. Is Elias alive?" Marcus said quickly. "Wounded but alive. Catherine has him imprisoned for now. She needs him alive to legitimize her claim to power." Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by fresh determination. If Elias was alive, there was still hope. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Marcus continued, moving toward her with urgency. "Catherine's people are searching the entire castle." But as he drew closer, something made Sloane hesitate. There was something wrong with his scent. Beneath the familiar notes of leather and tobacco was something else, something that made her newly awakened instincts scream danger. "How did you know I was here?" she asked, taking a step backward. Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Lucky guess." The lie hit her like a physical blow, and suddenly she understood. Beta Marcus, loyal, trusted Beta Marcus, was working with Catherine. "You're one of them," she whispered. His false smile faded, replaced by something colder. "I'm a pragmatist, princess. Catherine offered me the position of second alpha when she takes power. Your father offered me nothing but the honor of serving. Betrayal cut through her like ice. Another person she'd trusted. Another foundation crumbling beneath her feet. The attack on the eastern border, she said suddenly, pieces clicking together in her mind. 22 years ago. You were there. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or admiration for her quick thinking. Very good, he said. Yes, I was there. I was the one who coordinated with Catherine's family to take you. You were supposed to be leverage against your father, but when Queen Isabel died protecting you, the plan fell apart. My contacts panicked and abandoned you in the forest. The casual way he spoke about destroying her family made rage build in her chest like a living thing. You killed my mother. Isabel killed herself, Marcus corrected. She could have surrendered, could have negotiated. Instead, she chose to fight like a cornered animal. Her death was unfortunate but necessary. Red haze crept across Sloane's vision, and she felt something stirring deep inside her chest, something wild and powerful that had been sleeping her entire life. Unfortunate, she repeated, her voice eerily calm. You destroyed my family, stole my childhood, and you call it unfortunate. Marcus frowned, taking a step closer. Now, princess, don't do anything foolish. You're coming with me whether you like it or not, but I'd prefer not to drag you unconscious through the castle. The stirring in her chest grew stronger, spreading heat through her veins like liquid fire. Her skin began to tingle, and she could feel her heartbeat thundering in her ears. I don't think so, she said, and was surprised by the growl that underlay her words. Marcus's eyes widened as he caught the change in her scent. Impossible. You're wolfless. Not anymore, Sloane snarled, and something inside her chest finally cracked open completely. Power flooded through her like a dam bursting, ancient Leaken magic that had been bound by trauma and hidden heritage finally breaking free. Her bones began to elongate, her muscles swelling with supernatural strength as her body prepared for a shift that was 22 years overdue. But this wasn't the gentle awakening most werewolves experienced. This was violent, primal, fueled by rage and years of suppressed power. Her wolf didn't just wake up. It exploded into existence like a force of nature. Marcus scrambled backward. His own wolf trying to emerge in response to the overwhelming alpha presence suddenly radiating from the girl he'd dismissed as powerless. But he was too slow. Sloane's transformation was unlike anything she'd ever heard described. Instead of the painful but manageable shift most wolves experienced, her change was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment she was human, the next she was something magnificent and deadly. Her wolf was massive, larger than any normal werewolf had a right to be. Her fur was midnight black with silver markings that seemed to glow in the moonlight, and her eyes had become molten gold shot through with threads of power. This was what a true Leaken princess looked like. Not just a werewolf, but something far more ancient and dangerous. Marcus tried to run, but royal wolves were built for hunting. Sloane caught him before he made it 3 steps, her massive form pinning him to the ground with contemptuous ease. Her jaws closed around his throat, not enough to kill but more than enough to paralyze him with terror. Through the wolf's enhanced senses, she could smell his fear, could hear his heart hammering like a frightened bird's. But beneath the predatory satisfaction, her human mind remained in control, and she forced herself to release him without tearing out his throat. Please, Marcus gasped, blood trickling from superficial puncture wounds. I was following orders. Catherine promised. Sloane's wolf snarled, the sound echoing through the ruined library like thunder. She didn't want to hear his excuses or his promises of loyalty. She wanted justice for her mother, for her stolen childhood, for the father currently imprisoned below. But killing Marcus wouldn't accomplish any of that. It would just make her a murderer. Instead, she shifted back to human form, the transformation leaving her naked and shaking but unmistakably changed. The power still hummed beneath her skin, and she could feel her wolf pacing restlessly just beneath the surface, no longer hidden or dormant but fully awakened and eager for action. Here's what's going to happen, she told Marcus, her voice carrying an alpha command that made him flinch. You're going to take me to my father. You're going to help me free him. And then you're going to tell everyone exactly what Catherine has done and what part you played in it. And if I refuse? Marcus asked, though they both knew he had no real choice. The Alpha command wasn't a request. It was compulsion backed by supernatural power. Then I let my wolf finish what she started, Sloane replied simply. Marcus struggled to his feet, pressing a hand to his bleeding throat. Even if I help you, it won't matter. Catherine has too many supporters, too much influence. Your father is finished. Maybe, Sloane acknowledged. But he's still breathing, which means there's still hope. And now that my wolf has awakened, Catherine is going to find that overthrowing a Lycan princess is considerably harder than disposing of a powerless servant girl. She grabbed a tattered tapestry from the wall and wrapped it around herself like a cloak, not bothering with modesty when there were more important things to worry about. Move, she commanded, and felt a savage satisfaction when Marcus immediately obeyed. They made their way through the castle's hidden passages, routes that Marcus knew well from years of planning treachery. Sloane's newly awakened senses painted a detailed picture of the chaos below. She could smell fear and excitement, could hear the sounds of Catherine's supporters securing the building, could track the movements of guards and servants with predatory precision. But beneath all of that, she caught another scent that made her wolf perk up with interest. Blood. Fresh blood, tinged with the distinctive metallic note of silver weapons. Someone was hurt. Someone important, if the quality of the blood was any indication. Faster, she growled, and Marcus picked up the pace. They reached a heavy wooden door marked with ancient warding symbols, and Marcus hesitated. He's in there, he said quietly. But Princess, you should know. Catherine didn't just wound him in the fight. She's been questioning him. About loyalists, about hidden assets, about you. The implications hit her like ice water. Torture. Catherine had been torturing her father to extract information. Sloane's wolf snarled beneath her skin, demanding immediate violence against anyone who had harmed their newfound family. But she forced herself to think strategically. Charging in blindly would just get them both killed. How many guards? She asked. 2 outside the door, maybe more inside, Marcus replied. And Princess. Catherine is in there with him. Perfect. Sloane's lips curved in a smile that was all predator. Then it's time for the Luna to meet her replacement. She reached for the door handle, but Marcus caught her wrist. Wait, he said urgently. There's something else you need to know. Catherine isn't just after political power. She's been working with outside forces. Other packs, other alphas who want to see the Northern Territories fall. The words hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just a coup. It was the beginning of a war. Who? She demanded. But before Marcus could answer, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the passage behind them. Catherine's reinforcements, drawn by some alarm Sloane hadn't noticed. They were out of time. The footsteps behind them grew closer, but Sloane no longer cared about stealth or strategy. Her father was being tortured just beyond that door, and her newly awakened wolf demanded immediate action. The careful plans and political maneuvering could wait. Right now, she was going to save the only family she had left. Stay behind me, she ordered Marcus, then kicked the heavy door off its hinges with supernatural strength. The scene that greeted her was worse than she'd imagined. Elias hung from silver chains that burned angry welts into his wrists. His shirt torn and bloody from Catherine's questioning. The Luna herself stood beside a table of gleaming torture implements, her green eyes bright with sadistic pleasure. Well, well, Catherine purred, not seeming particularly surprised by the interruption. The lost princess finally shows her face. And looking so different. Sloane could feel the change in herself, the way she carried her body now, the predatory grace that came with an awakened wolf, the raw power that hummed beneath her skin like electricity. She was no longer the frightened servant girl who had dropped a chalice hours ago. She was something far more dangerous. Let him go, Sloane commanded, her voice carrying the full weight of royal alpha authority. Catherine laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I don't think so, darling. You see, your dear father has been telling me the most interesting things about hidden loyalists and secret alliances. We're just getting to the good parts. Elias raised his head with obvious effort, his amber eyes widening when he saw her. Sloane, he breathed. Your wolf, you shifted. Magnificent, isn't she? Catherine said mockingly. Too bad she's about to join you in chains. Silver works just as well on Lecan princesses as it does on Alpha Kings. The two guards flanking Catherine moved forward with practiced efficiency, silver-laced nets in their hands. But they were prepared for the frightened girl who had fled through the window, not the apex predator she had become. Sloane's transformation this time was controlled, deliberate. She flowed from human to wolf in one fluid motion, her massive black form filling the small chamber. The guards hesitated for a crucial second, overwhelmed by the sheer presence of a fully awakened royal Lecan. That hesitation cost them everything. Sloane struck like lightning, her claws raking across the first guard's chest before he could deploy his net. The second guard managed to throw his silver mesh, but she twisted away with impossible speed, the deadly strands barely grazing her fur. The injured guard screamed as he hit the wall, his armor crumpling under the force of her blow. The second guard reached for his sword, but Sloane was already there, her massive jaws clamping down on his wrist with enough pressure to shatter bone. Stop, Catherine commanded, pressing a silver blade against Elias's throat. One more move and your precious father dies. Sloane froze, her wolf form radiating barely contained violence. Catherine's smile widened at the tactical victory. There's a good dog, Catherine taunted. Now shift back and put these on like a good little princess. She gestured to a set of silver manacles on the torture table, their metal gleaming with malicious promise. Sloane knew that once those chains touched her skin, her newfound power would be useless. Silver didn't just burn werewolves, it severed their connection to their wolves, leaving them as helpless as humans. But as she hesitated, Marcus stepped forward from behind her. Actually, he said conversationally, I think there's been a change of plans. Catherine frowned, the silver blade wavering slightly. Marcus, what are you talking about? I'm talking about choosing the winning side, Marcus replied, then moved with the speed of a trained beta. His hand shot out, striking Catherine's wrist with surgical precision and sending the silver blade spinning away from Elias's throat. Catherine snarled, her own wolf beginning to emerge as she realized she'd been betrayed by her co-conspirator. But Marcus was ready for her. His claws extending as his partial shift gave him the speed and strength to match her fury. They crashed into each other with bone-jarring force, rolling across the floor in a tangle of claws and teeth. Catherine was strong and vicious, but Marcus had training and desperation on his side. More importantly, he had the element of surprise. While they fought, Sloane shifted back to human form and rushed to her father's side. The silver chains were locked with a complex mechanism, but her enhanced strength made short work of the metal. Elias collapsed as the burning restraints fell away, his body shaking from pain and silver poisoning. I'm sorry, he whispered as she caught him. I'm so sorry for everything, for not recognizing you, for what I almost did, for failing to protect you. None of that matters now, Sloane said fiercely, helping him to his feet. You're my father, and I'm getting you out of here. Behind them, Marcus gained the upper hand in his fight with Catherine, pinning her to the floor with his claws at her throat. But their victory was short-lived. The sound of running footsteps echoed from the corridor as Catherine's reinforcements finally arrived. How many? Elias asked, though he could barely stand. Too many, Marcus panted, blood streaming from claw marks across his face. A dozen at least, all armed with silver weapons. Sloane looked around the chamber desperately. There were no other exits, no windows large enough to escape through, and no way to fight that many opponents in such a confined space. They were trapped. But as the footsteps grew closer, something clicked in her mind. Elder Moira's words from earlier. Your bloodline is royal, child. Your wolf has been sleeping, waiting for recognition, waiting for you to take your rightful place. Take your rightful place. Sloane had been thinking like a victim, like someone who needed to run and hide from her enemies. But she wasn't a victim anymore. She was a Lycan princess, heir to one of the most powerful bloodlines in werewolf history. It was time to start acting like it. "Marcus," she said, her voice carrying new authority. "How many pack members are truly loyal to Catherine versus how many are just following orders out of fear?" Marcus blinked at the unexpected question. "Maybe half are true believers. The rest are just trying to survive." And what would happen if they saw their rightful Alpha King free and fighting alongside his newly discovered heir? Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. They'd remember where their real loyalties lie. Elias struggled to straighten, pride flickering in his amber eyes despite his injuries. "You want to make a stand here? Fight our way out instead of running." "I want to remind everyone in this castle who we are," Sloane said, power radiating from her like heat from a forge. "I want to show them what happens when you threaten a Lycan royal family." The first of Catherine's soldiers appeared in the doorway, silver weapons gleaming in their hands. But instead of attacking immediately, they hesitated when they saw the tableau before them, their supposed prisoners free, their Luna pinned and bleeding, and something indefinably dangerous in the way the young woman stood beside the Alpha King. "Lay down your weapons," Sloane commanded, her voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. "This rebellion ends now." Several of the soldiers actually took a step backward, their wolves recognizing the power in her voice even if their minds couldn't process it. But their leader, a scarred veteran named Commander Hayes, sneered at her attempt at dominance. "You're no princess," he spat. "You're just a wolfless servant playing dress-up. Stand aside and maybe we'll make your death quick." Sloane smiled, and there was something in that expression that made even Hayes hesitate. "You're right about one thing," she said softly. "I'm not the same wolfless servant I was this morning. Let me show you what I've become." Her transformation this time was different from before, not explosive with rage or controlled for strategy, but majestic in its deliberate power. She didn't just shift into a wolf, she became something out of legend, a creature that belonged in ancient stories about the first Lycans who had ruled alongside the moon goddess herself. Her wolf form filled the chamber like a living shadow, her midnight fur seeming to absorb and reflect the torchlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Her eyes were molten gold shot through with silver, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in the bones of everyone present. "I am Sloane, daughter of Isabel and Elias, heir to the Northern Territories and child of the royal bloodline that has protected these lands for 1,000 years, she declared, her words echoing with supernatural authority. "Any who stand against me stand against the will of the moon goddess herself." The effect was immediate and devastating. Half the soldiers dropped to their knees instinctively, their wolves submitting to the overwhelming presence of true royalty. Even Commander Hayes staggered, his weapon clattering from nerveless fingers as the reality of what he was facing crashed over him. But Catherine wasn't finished yet. With a snarl of rage, she threw off Marcus's restraining grip and lunged not at Sloane, but at the weakened Elias. Silver claws extended from her fingertips, aimed at his heart with killing intent. Sloane moved faster than thought, intercepting Catherine's attack with a collision that shook the entire chamber. They went down in a tangle of fur and fury, royal Lycan against ambitious pretender, fighting for the right to rule. Catherine was skilled and desperate, but she was also fighting against 1,000 years of royal breeding and the fury of a daughter protecting her father. Sloane's wolf was larger, stronger, and driven by righteous anger that burned like a star in her chest. The fight was brief and brutal. When it ended, Catherine lay still beneath Sloane's massive form, her neck cleanly broken by jaws designed to end threats to the royal bloodline. Silence fell over the chamber like a heavy blanket. The remaining soldiers stared at their new princess, covered in the blood of their former Luna, radiating power that made the very air shimmer with possibility. "The rebellion is over," Sloane announced, her voice carrying to every corner of the castle through supernatural acoustics. "Catherine is dead. Long live the king." "Long live the king," Marcus echoed, dropping to one knee. "Long live the princess." The chant was taken up by the soldiers, then by guards throughout the castle as word spread with impossible speed. Within minutes, the entire stronghold rang with voices proclaiming loyalty to their rightful rulers. Sloane shifted back to human form, exhaustion finally hitting her as the adrenaline faded. She had found her family, awakened her wolf, stopped a coup, and claimed her heritage all in the span of a single night. The frightened servant girl who had dropped a chalice seemed like a different person entirely. Elias limped over to her, his wounds already beginning to heal now that the silver was out of his system. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, father and daughter, strangers and family, survivors of a night that had changed everything. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "Your mother would be proud too." Sloane felt tears threatening for the first time since her wolf had awakened. "I wish I could have known her." "You carry her strength," Elias assured her. "Tonight proved that. You are every inch your mother's daughter, and every inch a true princess." As dawn broke over the northern territories, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sloane stood at the window of her father's study and looked out over lands that were now her birthright. She had a father to get to know, a pack to help heal, and a role as heir to grow into. But for the first time in her life, she knew exactly who she was and where she belonged. She was Sloane of the Northern Territories, Leakin princess and daughter of wolves. And she was home. Then,